This episode of the Better 2 podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needom, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi, gang. Donna here. Thanks for tuning in to the Better 2 podcast. Today's guest is blind blogger Maxwell Ivey. Max has been blind since the age of 5. He can see light perception, so he's legally blind, but technically he is blind. And having a husband that I had, and we talk about this on the podcast, my husband was legally blind as well. So I'm not going to say I know exactly what it's like for him, but I do know some of the struggles. And we don't necessarily focus on that because he has something a little bit more interesting than that. And it was the fact that his family, he grew up with a family that had a long history in the carnival industry. So we talk about that as well. So I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Max. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Donna, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I am staying warm. I did not go outside because it's cold up here where I'm at, and I choose to stay inside. Even though it's sunny, it's misleading.
Yes, I can only imagine. It seems like in the last week or so, I've been on 3 or 4 podcasts, and every single one of them has been digging out from snow.
We haven't had, we got very lucky. Normally we would have snow, more snow than we did. Since I've lived here for 20 something years, almost 30, we've had snow usually as early as October. This year, we didn't really have our first significant snowfall until January. So we are really at a detriment. We had some snow in December, but not much. But that being said, 2 days ago, it was negative 16.
So where do you live exactly?
I live outside of Chicago. And I mean, we had a warm December. Normally by then we've had really cold weather, but January is usually when we get the super negative 16s or whatever. And this isn't the worst. I think a couple of years ago we had like negative 25 with a wind chill of negative 40. So
yeah, I remember that year. Y'all were some great free entertainment because all the news stories that we were getting from Chicago and Minneapolis were of people, turning hot water into snow. And, it was just some really, like I say, really bad free television. But it was fun for us because we were only in the 30s or 40s,
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend in Michigan who I told her where we're at, and she lives in northern Michigan, and she's like, you were colder than we are. I'm like, okay. But so it happens. And I mean, I grew up in Louisiana, so I'm used to the warmer winters, but yeah. I like it up here because during the summer, it's too damn hot down south. So
that is so true. And here in Houston, it's not only hot, it's very humid.
Well, growing up in New Orleans,
oh yeah,
I know all about it. Let me curl my hair so I walk out the door and it goes straight as soon as the humidity hits it. So I am more than aware of that. And then let it rain for like 5 minutes, and then it's going to be a nice cooling rain. No, it's going to rain for 5 minutes. You're going to drive a block away and it's going to be dry bone because it's all gone already because it's so damn hot. Anyway, we didn't come here to talk about that. So you used to be a carny.
Yeah, my family has owned carnivals for 3 generations now. And actually it's 5 because my cousin is still in the business. And his kids and grandkids are also in the business. However, it's taken a bit of a hit over the last couple of years due to COVID and social distancing, and now even supply chain issues, having to get some supplies for the games and concession booths. So it's had it a little rough. But my grandfather started our family's first carnival in the 50s. And at one time, there were 4 different carnivals operating in the state of Texas that were part of the Wagner Ivey family.
Wow.
And I grew up in that business and was lucky enough to get to work alongside my family, even though from an early age, I knew I was going to lose most, if not all of my vision to retinitis pigmentosa or RP. And I started losing my vision gradually when I was 4 or 5 years old, was legally blind, and had to start using a white cane and start ready to read Braille when I was in junior high school. And by the time I graduated from college, it's down to what it is now, which is light perception, which in my opinion is simpler for most people just to tell them that I'm totally blind because they can understand that. So despite that, for encouragement from family, teachers, scoutmasters, and just growing up around people who didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what they didn't have. I graduated from traditional schools. I'm one of the few legally blind Eagle Scouts. Wow. And I worked alongside the family in the carnival business for over 15 years before my dad's death caused us to go out of business. And then after that, I started a website to help people sell surplus rides and games. And that was just a really, that was a totally new experience. And I had to learn a whole bunch of things that I had never done before, never thought I would do before, and wasn't sure I could do. But the great thing is once I did the first couple of things I absolutely had to do, I realized, hey, there's a lot more things you are capable of than you would have ever given yourself credit with before. So in 2007, I filed for the domain name midwaymarketplace.com, which is still in existence. And I still sell some equipment for people, but it's just not my focus anymore. I'm more focused on the blogging, the podcasting at this point. But I had to teach myself how to hand code HTML. I had to write copy, manage images, recruit clients, set fees. I had to make a lot of decisions. And then, of course, social media came along. So people were like, Max, we were really impressed with the way you take on all these difficult challenges and just seem to do whatever you have to do some way. We'd like to hear more about that. So I started my second website, theblindblogger.net, where I share my experiences as a blind entrepreneur. And thankfully, that's led to 4 books. It's led to me traveling the country solo. It's led to who knows how many 100 podcast interviews I've done and getting to sing and speak in public in different places around the country. I've also started my own podcast, What's Your Excuse? And just recently we've started the What's Your Excuse Network to help other people with disabilities launch their own podcast. So probably more than you wanted to hear about me, but I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. No,
that's fine. That's fine. I want to go back to the carny aspect for a second, because, when we think of carnies, I have to go here because everybody thinks of carnival workers as what you have seen in the images on TV and in movies, and that basically you're always moving around and it's not such a normal life. But you're telling me that you were an Eagle Scout and you're telling me that you graduated from traditional school. So that tells me that you had somewhat of a traditional life, because being an Eagle Scout, you're going to have to be in a certain Boy Scout group to be able to do that. Because my ex-husband was an Eagle Scout. So your life was not, granted, we're not even talking about the blindness. We're talking about just the carnival aspect. So you still actually had somewhat of a normal life.
Right. But you have to realize that the carnival business changed. We're talking about, I got my Eagle Scout in 84. And so we're talking, 40 years now or getting close to it. Yeah. So the carnival business has changed. See, when my family had their businesses, you worked about 8 months out of the year. And in Texas, maybe 9.5, because the weather would get so bad that nobody would want to come out. This was before you could, set up on shopping malls or set up in arenas and convention halls and those sorts of venues. So the business was seasonal. Me and my brothers, we would stay in school till the school year was over in April or May, usually with one of our aunts or uncles or a grandmother who didn't travel the whole season. And then we would be with the carnival for June, July, and August. And then we'd be back in school in September. And again, staying with relatives who didn't go out. And then, of course, in the spring and the fall, a lot of times the carnival would be working an event that was close enough to the house that you could go out and work the weekends and just drive back and forth. So it was different. Nowadays, it's totally corporate. When my grandfather started in the 50s, you could buy a brand new octopus, which nobody knows what that is anymore.
I do.
Okay. People might know the spider, which is a like, let's say, X-Men version of the octopus. He bought that ride in the 50s for $7,500, and that included the trailer that they hauled it on.
Wow.
Nowadays, that ride is no longer in production, but if it were, it would be a $250,000 attraction.
Wow.
If it were still
Yeah.
being produced. The business has changed because nowadays an average adult ride is $250,000 and up. 375 is kind of like the median number on an average adult ride right now. Wow. And an average children's ride, even if it's one that they call them intermediate rides, it can also, the parents and grandparents can also ride with the little kids. Looking at 150,000 and up.
Wow.
And some of these portable rides take 5, 10, 15 trucks or more, and some of them cost literally millions of dollars. So the industry has changed. Even the concession trailers. My grandmother bought her first cotton candy stand for $2,500, and nowadays it's nothing to drop $250,000 on a food wagon.
Wow.
So you have to stay out year round. You have to work big events with large crowds that are there for long periods of time. Some of these companies have to work outside the U.S. to take advantage of climates in other countries like Puerto Rico. The Dominican Republic used to be a place they would go. Of course, they don't go there now. But so the industry's changed a lot. Nowadays, kids are raised in the carnival business. They're homes. They go to school online over the internet, using data cards or hotspots or smartphones. That's how they do it nowadays. And there's a couple of carnivals. There's a couple of carnivals still. One on the East Coast called, let me think, I'm going to get the name right. Straight Shows on the East Coast. They operate their own traveling school.
Wow.
Yeah. They've been doing that for years and years. They're also the last carnival in America still operating their own train.
Okay. Wow.
They don't use it as much as they used to, because there was a time when the entire carnival traveled on that train from one town to the next. Now they only use it a few weeks out of the year, and only to transport the heaviest attractions, like a rainbow or a top spin, or some of the new stuff that's just so heavy. The only way they can really move it around is by train. So the business has changed a whole lot. I mean, there's a Ferris wheel that Ray Cammack shows, or RCS Incorporated, excuse me, because they're no longer Ray Cammack, brings to the livestock show in Houston that cost them $20 million just a few years ago.
And then you see videos posted on YouTube or TikTok of like the one ride that was going around, the counterbalance kind of ride, where it's skinny on top, and then it has I don't know the name of it. It has the seated where there's like 2 rows of seats or 4 rows of seats, and it swings back and forth until it gets enough momentum to go all the way around. And the ride was lifting off the ground.
Well, that's because it wasn't properly ballasted.
Of course.
And just in case you're curious what probably happened there, a lot of those rides are being counterbalanced with water, because they don't have to transport the water from one town to the next on the trailer. So what they'll do is they'll have bulkheads, ballast in those trailers. And if they fill those up completely with water like they're supposed to, it will more than counterbalance that ride. And it saves them a lot of difficulty moving that particular ride from one town to the next. So it's just like with I don't know if you've ever seen them, but if you ever see somebody deliver a brand new bulldozer or steamroller, a lot of those, the weight in the part that makes the ground roll is water.
Okay.
Because it's heavy and you don't have to transport it to the site. You can just, you move the machine there and you find the water when you get there.
Yeah, which makes sense.
So things have changed a lot. In my grandfather's day, 8 or 9 rides was a big carnival. In my family's day, 25, 30 rides was considered a big carnival. Nowadays, I know of at least 10 shows that are traveling with 50 rides or more.
Wow. Well, and here's the problem with this. I mean, besides now we have COVID and the food chain, the supply chain problem. Now we're going to have the high inflation. So, people aren't going to have the extra money necessarily to go out and have these, fun times like they used to.
I'm not exactly sure, because I've got family that remember the times after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And when World War II was over, because the manufacturing process hadn't caught back up yet again, there were people with lots of money to spend and nothing to spend it on. So inflation was a problem. But the thing is the stuff that people could buy that was actually available, like if you could buy a new car, which was rare, people were routinely overpaying for items just to get them. So if anything that takes money, that makes it harder for people to pay their bills and stuff is generally hard on the entertainment industry. But the thing is a lot of times people will still say to themselves, what do I do that I really enjoy? And if I really enjoy going to the Midway and riding the roller coaster or the top spin or the kamikaze, then I'll find a way to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when my grandma worked on the Navy base. I mean, my dad used to take me to carnivals all the time because he would go to like the Strawberry Festival or some other festival. My grandmother I was a freshman in high school, and there was this guy that I was kind of seeing, and they had all these snacks at the Navy Exchange. So we had those, and then we went to the carnival, and they only had 3 rides. And one was the Scrambler. The other one was the Paratrooper. And then there was a Ferris wheel, which I don't really particularly care for Ferris wheels. Don't ask me why I won't ride a Ferris wheel, but I was willing to ride the Paratrooper because you're still up in the air. But anyway, so I ride the Scrambler, we ride the Paratrooper, ride the Scrambler again, and the entrance and exit was at the same place. And I'm with this guy, and I think he's cute and everything. Well, after the 3rd time of spinning around and having this food, I bring my hand to my mouth, and I can't stop myself, and I end up taking a Technicolor yawn all over my hand myself and the entrance exit of the ride. And I was never more embarrassed in my life. And it's like I had never gotten sick on a ride before in my life. And I knew it was coming. It was just kind of like, oh, I don't feel so good. And yeah. That's one thing about carnivals. I'm sure you see a lot of that.
Yeah, it happens, and there's usually on the rides that it's going to happen on, you've got what we used to call green help, which means you hire people from town and you give them a little bit of money so that they, usually they'll work a couple of days and then maybe they'll quit before the night you take the stuff down. But their jobs are do stuff like that, to clean up when people make a mess. And the thing about it is usually the rides that do that, the operator, he has to put up with what you did. But he also generally gets to keep anything that gets left on the ride. So a ride like the Scrambler would knock a lot of stuff out of people's pockets.
True.
I don't know if you've ever been on a ride called the Gravitron or not, but
actually I was going to mention that, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I have known guys who have come home with cell phones and pagers because, the week was over and it wasn't like they could hang around town until they found the guy who owned that beeper or phone or whatever. So, I mean, a lot of money would come off the Gravitron, the Zipper, the Scrambler. And yeah, the Gravitron did have some mechanical issues and there were some injuries on the Gravitron, but they eventually found out the problem with the Gravitron was some of the bolts that were used to put it together in the manufacturing process were defective.
Oh, nice. It wasn't the Gravitron, but it was similar to the Gravitron because it was a ride where the floor dropped out, and it might have been the Rainbow.
No, that would have either been the Roundup or that would have been the Rotor.
Maybe it was the Rotor. Okay, so my dad. This is a different fair. I'm 10 years old. He basically has said, I'm going to go hang out over here. Here's the tickets. Go. Now, you would never do this with your child nowadays. This is the 70s, folks. So, kid, you would let your kid go do whatever. So here's some tickets. Go ride the rides. All right. So I kept bothering him. Like, Dad, can you come ride some rides with me? Yeah. So my dad has been hitting the beer garden all day. He's been having beer and enjoying music and everything. And now he's acquiesced and said, okay, yeah, I'll go on a ride with you. So we're going to go on this ride where you're sucked up against the wall and the floor drops out. And yes, there's change coming out of his pocket. He does lose change out of his pocket. And as the ride slowly slows down, and as soon as they say we can go, my dad is off that ride quicker than quick at the nearest trash can, puking his guts up. And then I felt bad because it's like, well, I didn't want him to get sick, but it was just like, It's like, yeah, I'm not riding any more rides. I'm like, okay. So, yeah.
This is just stuff that happens at the fair, you know.
Mm-hmm. Lasting memories, lasting fun childhood memories.
Yeah. And we would do that 40 weeks out of the year. So nowadays they do it 52 weeks out of the year, and only the top people, the supervisors and the owners, actually get any time away from the business.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, the way it's portrayed, it's not always that's the one thing about TV movies. They don't always portray things accurately, and they don't always portray things nicely.
Oh, they were accurate. They were accurate. They were accurate. Yeah, I mean, I've got relatives who were in Texas. There's a famous 60 Minutes episode where Mike Wallace showed up in North Texas somewhere and wanted information on some of the games that were operating back in the 70s. And one of my relatives actually dropped the awnings in his face and told him to get off their midway. So, I mean, so stuff like that happened, and it still happens occasionally. And one of the downsides to the cost of the equipment is somebody has to pay for that equipment. So, you know, there are some people who are just tempted by the need for the extra income. And so even on big midways, sometimes you will still see some games where you're like, man, why are they still doing that? So, and generally the smaller the midway, the more likely it is that the stuff you've seen on TV is either accurate or was accurate.
Okay. Well, I wasn't meaning so much about shady games. I was just meaning they paint Carnival people to be not so pleasant. Maybe that's the better way to put it.
Well, there used to, for a long time, there was generally antagonism between the Carnival people and the townspeople. So there's probably some justification for some of those portrayals. I know that with my family, we always went out of our way to be nice to the locals, to deal fairly with the committee organizers. And more often than not, we would leave an event the year after a larger carnival had decided not to come back, and we would play it with our 8-9 rides, and they would end up with more money from us than they did the year before. And of course, the reason for that was when my dad said, we're going to give you 25% of what we take in. That's what he actually did, instead of 25% of 25%, so but there's always been some animosity. And in some places, even now, it's not a good idea to leave the carnival location during the week if you don't have to.
Understand.
So, but I learned a lot of important lessons from my dad over the years. And the most important thing I learned from being in the carnival business is that you're never going to have all the time, money, or other resources that you want to have. So you just have to find a way. You have to come up with a creative solution, because in the carnival business, the only thing that matters is, can you get open by Thursday or Friday night, and can they ride the Ferris wheel and buy a funnel cake?
Okay.
And the visiting public could care less if you had a truck breakdown, or if your generator quit, or if somebody in the family is sick. So since you grow up in that atmosphere after years and years of, well, there has to be a way, we just have to find that way, we just have to get through this week, and we'll worry about next week, it really does, build up that mindset. It builds up those muscles to where, one, you can think about creative solutions, but the other thing is you just decide, okay, we're going to find a way. There has to be a way. We may not like the way, but we'll get there somehow, and, when I combine that with the fact that for a lot of people who have experienced vision loss or some other disability also have to learn to be creative, you put those together with a positive mindset and a goal of first wanting to start the website to help people sell their used rides, and now, to encourage people and build a business around creating content, it makes me pretty successful,
Mm-hmm. It does. And, I was going to pivot to talking about your vision condition. I mean, was it something that ran in your family, or were you the only one that had this condition?
Well, we can find no evidence of anybody in my family ever having it, but retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, can skip generations, and it can show itself in different degrees in different generations. So it could be that people in my family had it, but chalked it up to old age or to some other cause for their vision getting weaker. And since people weren't even tested for it until the late 60s, early 70s, there's just no way to know.
Right. I mean, we were talking a little bit off camera, and my friends know this. So, I mean, people that are that don't know me. I mean, my husband, he was a type 1 diabetic. So he got diabetes and he did really well and he lost the weight. This is before I met him. And then somebody told him, hey, I know how you can trick the system. And I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want to give anybody else advice on how to be a bad diabetic. I mean, he was proud to say he was bad diabetic at a certain point. He's like, I'm the poster boy for a bad diabetic. I got neuropathy. I got a heart condition. He had kidney failure. And he ended up losing his vision. He ended up getting first, it was weird because we went to a doctor, and because you're not, you have the eye issue. We went to the doctor, and this one doctor kept saying, well, you have herpes of the eye. And so, but the test kept coming back negative. And so they're like, well, what we want to do is we want to go in there, for lack of a better way to put it, I don't know the technical term. We want to go in and either burn the cornea off, burn that off, or we want to button tuft it. Go in there and so we're like, let's go to a different doctor. So we went to a different doctor, and first thing she says to him is, well, you have diabetic retinopathy. You're not making tears. So let's cauterize. We'll put some tear plugs in and we'll go there first. Well, during this, he ends up with a stroke in his eye. So he loses vision in his left eye. And then his other vision, he starts getting a cataract because he had retina reattachment. He had 3 retina reattachments. And that's always a fun thing. By this point, I am with him. I am his wife. And the retina reattachment was a whole thing. But so no one tells anybody that when you have a retina reattachment, you're going to get a cataract. So slowly his vision's decreasing. They've done laser, of course, because of the diabetes and the bleeding vessels. So he goes in we bought this house that I'm in. We bought this house. He never really even saw it. His dad and I bought it. He was there, but he didn't really see it because he couldn't. So they go in and they take they go in. This is like 2-3 years later after we bought the house. They go in, they replace, they do the cataract surgery, replace the lens. And he comes home like the day after and he's like, oh my gosh, I can see the house. So like for 6 months, he had great vision. He got to see things, but slowly but surely the vision started decreasing. And this is what I'm going to say, because I know you've been through this, I'm sure. As a seeing person, we don't think about it because we live out in the country. So there would be times when we were driving back from dialysis. And when he could see, it was great. When he couldn't, I would make the mistake and go, wow, look at that sunset. And the fact of the matter is he couldn't see it. And it's like, we don't think about those things. And I mean, I have my own issues, health issues and medical issues, but we don't think about those things because if somebody looks normal, we don't even register in our head that something's off, and I mean, it's like, we don't think about vision. We think everybody can see, we think everybody can hear, but really when you start losing that, and I know you understand that, it changes your world.
Yeah. And, you talk about looking normal. I can't tell you how many times over the years people would come up to my booth on the Midway, and I would turn my head to look towards them as I was talking to them, and they would accuse me of not being blind because I was looking at them while I was talking to them.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, people would come up to when we went somewhere and somebody walked up to John on his left side and they're like extending their hand to him to shake it. And I have to say, I looked at him, I'm like, he can't see you. I'd have to have this conversation many a times because somebody would be like, oh, hi, John. And it's like, he can't see you over there. You forget this and it's just a whole world to navigate. And I think people don't realize that you may look normal, but you're not in that person's body or their skin.
Right. For example, I have a friend named Chelsea Nguyen. She's a image consultant and now vocational instructor, and she teaches visually impaired people about their style and grooming and also interview skills. And we actually had to sit down and brainstorm for interview purposes before COVID. What does a blind person do with the whole shaking hands process? And we finally realized the best thing to do was just to expect that somebody would want to shake their hand and tell them when they walked up to a desk or walked up to a person, just to ask, could I shake your hand? And that seemed to solve it. But that's the kind of things that people with vision loss have to think about. They have to, how am I going to do this? And of course, COVID kind of made some things easier and some things harder, because I was at a conference when COVID really hit and they were talking about locking down the airports. I thought I was going to get stuck in Orlando. And that week they decided they were going to put stickers on people's lanyards. So depending on what color sticker you had would be whether you would shake hands or whether you would hug or whether you would just bump elbows or whether you would just wave. So, knowing that most people weren't going to come up and shake my hand actually made that week a little easier. But, not knowing when people were waving at me, that kind of was not fun. But usually people come up and talk to me, so it wasn't a big thing. But yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I've been in a car with somebody, or I've been at church with somebody, and they have either asked me to look at something, or they have turned and put their cell phone in front of me because they just forget. Well,
I will say this, because as we've gotten the smartphone, the one thing we learned, and people were always amazed, we were looking at appliances one day, a washer and a dryer, and John wanted to see inside, and it's too dark because, once again, we have light perception issues, as you understand.
Yes. Yeah.
So I grab my cell phone and I take a picture, and the sales clerk's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Just watch." So I took a picture, and then I blew it up, and John could see it. And the guy's like, "Wow, that's really smart." I'm like, that's life. That's, instead of having the extra equipment that you used to have to buy for seeing things, he was able to use his phone or my phone to be able to do this. When we would get phones, there would always be the bigger size phones, and same thing with a tablet. It's like he didn't end up with a tiny tablet. We made sure we had a big tablet for him. And I mean, he was fortunate enough to have vision, and he never completely lost it. But like my grandmother, as she got older, when she came up here to live after Katrina, she could barely see the E, and her vision was so bad, but she had never said anything about it. So I knew she liked wrestling. I knew she loved wrestling. So we had an Xbox, and I ordered a game, and it was a wrestling game. I've never played it since. But I'm playing this wrestling game, and she's thinking she's watching a real wrestling match. John comes in the living room, and she's like, "Oh, sit down. This is a really good match. It's a great match. You have to watch it." I'm like, okay, as long as she's enjoying it, that's all that matters. So she got, you do what you got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially when you're dealing with somebody older who's either losing vision or has never accepted their vision loss, a lot of times that's really what it comes down, is finding something that makes them feel the same way they would have felt 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So I think what you did was a great solution. And it was cool that, the video game was out, and I'm glad it was, whichever one it was, I'm glad it was one that was easy for you to play, because a lot of those games are just, my brother has forced me to listen to a lot of video game reviews, and it seems like a lot of those games are just horrible to play. So at least you had a good one,
It was Xbox, so it's a lot simpler than they are now. And I mean, I'll be honest, most of my game playing now, even though I do like some race card games, I stick to the Lego games. They're easy, simple, and they're funny. Otherwise, I've tried playing Tomb Raider, one of the newer Tomb Raider games, and the fact that you could actually visually see all the blood and you could hear a dog ripping somebody up, no, that's not, I don't consider that fun. I call that, for me, that's anxiety. So yeah.
Yeah. And there is a whole generation now of visually impaired and even blind gamers.
Really?
And I'm not one of them, because I basically have not picked up a video game of any kind since Asteroids was the big seller. So that's like 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So if I have to go to an arcade, I try to find the skee ball machine or the mini bowling.
You would have loved me. You would have loved my job in 1986. I started out as a birthday hostess and moved my way up to an assistant manager at Chuck E. Cheese back when Chuck E. Cheese was cool still, because you had the video games. Besides Skee-Ball, you actually had all the video games. So
yeah. And a lot of those video games have been replaced with redemption games and prize games, and there's not a whole lot of real arcade games left in the arcade anymore from what I've. Because at one time, me and my brother were thinking of opening an arcade, so we actually did a lot of research into it. But yeah, that's what that's what's real. I'm working. Someday I'm going to write a blog post about games and toys, because when you're growing up and you're losing your visions, a lot of times it's okay. You got this. What's supposed to be a great new game. Now, will I be able to play it?
Yeah.
So. My two favorite games from when I was younger were Othello and Simon, because I could play both of those, and Othello was better than Simon because other people like to play Othello, and it was one of those games you could basically put in your jeans pocket if you weren't wearing really tight jeans. So you could carry it pretty much anywhere. It had the magnetic display and it folded out, and the pieces all went inside the box. So yeah. There's a guy named Tom Sullivan. He's a famous entertainer, talk show host, documentary filmmaker who happens to be blind. And his first autobiography wrote the lines. He said the three most beautiful words in the English language are "want to play." Because when he was growing up, nobody wanted to play with him in his neighborhood.
Aw.
Yeah, he finally had some new family move in when he was 6 or 7. So, but like I say, one of these days I want to write about games and toys.
Othello was a great game. My uncle gave me that, and I used to carry it around. And for me, the statement about nobody wants to play, I grew up an only child. So, I often joke, and I've talked about this on the podcast. One Christmas, my parents decided to give me one of these giant bags because I was staying at my grandparents' house that night. And they give me this outside the front door of my grandparents' house is this big chimney-shaped bag. And in this bag is about 20 board games. And I often joke, it's like you give an only child board games. Yeah, okay. And I had Gnip Gnop. I'm pretty. Gnip Gnop was the 6 balls. You had to get the 3 balls over to the other side. So I'm playing Gnip Gnop by myself. Now, that's like playing Pong by yourself. Once again, very first video game system I had was a Sears Pong set where I had like 6 games or whatever.
Yeah. We had that.
You get creative and you start trying to play Pong by yourself, and then you just put it in a loop. And as an only child, games are kind of like, well, okay,
Yeah.
So I think blog post about games and everything would be interesting. I do.
Yeah, like I said, I find it interesting. We're having, like I said, there's a whole generation of visually impaired and blind people now that are playing games, and some of them are even developing games, which I think is really cool.
Nice. I think I think if you can embrace and grow, even though you have a disability, that's important. I mean, it is, because you're still functioning and you're still enjoying your life. While your life might not look identical to what my life looks like, you're still living fully and you're not falling for the woe is me situation.
Well, like I said, my family has never done the woe is me thing. We might allow it for 5 minutes, but that's usually the extent of it.
Well, and it's a pretty powerful place not to be. I mean, if you can get yourself out of that after a short amount of time and still be okay and carry on, and which obviously you've done most of your life, that's, I give you kudos, because it's not always so easy.
Right, it isn't. And so that's why I like to share. I have this technique that I've used, and over the years I've done it so often that it's just become a natural thing. I don't think about it anymore. But I like to tell people that if they're wanting to be more positive, so to find the positive in their lives, they have to decide it's there and look for it until they find it. Just like if you lose the TV remote, it's in the house somewhere. And even if you have to tear the cushions off the couch to find it, eventually it's going to turn up. And then, if you're sitting there with a cold drink in one hand, your favorite show on the TV, yeah, you'll worry about cleaning up the mess later. So I tell people to find the positive. It really is that simple. You decide it's there, or you decide it's going to be there. So, getting up in the morning and saying that at least one good thing is going to come out of my day and expecting it to show up, usually it will. Either it'll be something obvious, or it'll be something that maybe wasn't a perfect example of a positive experience, but you can find some positives in it. And that's how, you do that often enough, it becomes a habit. And that's how, when you do things like selling a $250,000 carousel and not getting paid for it, you can find the positives of increased web traffic and new clients. Or, when you lose the boat, when you literally lose the boat on Lake Conroe on a scout fishing trip, you can find the positive in learning how to properly cast while you're standing on the boat, on the dock, waiting for the rest of them to come back with their fish. You build it up over time. And that's why I think one of the worst things that most experts do is they make things seem simple and make things seem like that if you start affirmations today, that affirmations will work for you tomorrow. Or if you start meditation today, meditation will work for you by the end of the week. And in most cases, it takes practice. It takes making something a habit to the point where it becomes part of your personality for it to really work when you need it to work.
Right. And I mean, going back to the affirmations and the meditation, you also have to allot for that with everything that is positive, there is a negative. There is a shadow self to ourselves. So we have to be able to see that, navigate it, and deal with it. We can't just put our fingers in our ears and cover our eyes at the same time saying la la la. It's
yes, you can. It just doesn't work very often.
Well, it goes back. I've talked about this before. There was an insurance claim on my desk where I asked the lady, I said, how did you avoid the accident? Because the car was coming at him. Her answer on a recorded statement was, well, when my son gets scared, I tell him to cover his eyes. So, and count to 3. So I covered my eyes and counted to 3. And I'm sitting there going, you did, and I can't say anything to her, but I'm thinking to myself, wow, you instead of turning the wheel, you covered your eyes and counted to 3. But I'm just sitting there, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, You're insane, lady. What the heck? I mean, she could have gotten to a serious accident, but take my hands off the wheel. It doesn't matter. Really?
There are people like that. And, going back to affirmations, one of the things that I tell people to start with, and I mentioned this in my book, It's Not the Cookie, It's the Bag, about why affirmations don't work, is generally people will say several negative things about themselves before they stop themselves. And then they feel worse because they didn't say positive things to themselves. So I like to think of affirmations like a seesaw. So in the beginning, every time you say something negative, then you have to find something positive to say about yourself. And then as you do it, it becomes a habit. Then you can slow yourself down as saying those negative things about yourself or to yourself. And, eventually you get to the point where you stop yourself. And also eventually you'll get to the point where you can find more positive things to say about yourself than negative things. It never gets to the point where you never utter a bad word about yourself to yourself. But the healthier you can talk to yourself over time is, in my opinion, when affirmations work.
Well, almost definitely, because you're not, I often have one of my best friends I have a conversation with, and I'll talk about wanting to do something. And then I'll give this laundry list afterwards of what's something that'll keep me from doing it. And she goes, you've stopped yourself before you even started because you've overanalyzed everything. And it's like, well, I mean, we had this conversation this afternoon. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, you have to get out of your own way in your own head. And a lot of that stuff comes from the material that you were given when you were a kid, because, you would come in and say, hey, look, I got this great idea, Ma. Go away. You don't know what the heck you're talking about. Just go away.
Well, one thing I think that would really help would be if more of the people that are accomplishing things would share more about their fears and their worries and their mistakes and their setbacks than they do. I think the biggest myth going is that successful people either hide their difficult times or they stop talking about their difficult times.
Agreed.
So, maybe they aren't consciously making an effort to only share the good things, but they just, a really good example for me is last year I had John Lee Dumas on my podcast. I had him on my podcast by accident. I didn't try to book, the rock star that is JLD, but I said something on Twitter about how I would love to have him on my podcast, except for the fact that it doesn't sound to me like he's ever struggled or dealt with any kind of adversity. So he responded back. He said, how about a guy who was forced to go into combat and lost 4 of his brothers in arms in one day? And does that sound like somebody you'd like to have on your podcast? So I had to apologize very quickly and say, yes, you are, you have struggled. And then I found out about how nervous he used to get when he started doing his podcast. But those are things that you would have to dig deep into his website to find out. So that's what I mean. They stopped talking about these difficult times they've had. And I don't, for most of them, it's not something they do on purpose. It's just, they maybe get tired of talking about it, or they, are focused on saying other things because it's more beneficial to their business and their brand. So I think we really need to share the difficult times that we all have. And hopefully, we can encourage more people. I just finished writing an article for the American Printing House for the Blind's website on starting a podcast. And I purposely took the point of view, and I used my own experiences because this is how I've done it, that there are a lot of things people think they have to do in order to start a successful podcast that just aren't true for most people. They think they have to have thousands of dollars worth of equipment, or they have to edit their audio to within an inch of its life, or, they have to have so many episodes recorded, or they have to have fancy artwork, just so many things they think they have to have, when really all you have to have is a topic that you're passionate about and the willingness to just press record and put your stuff out into the world. So I feel really proud about that. That article hasn't come out yet, but I feel like I'm going to do a lot of good eliminating some of these things that overwhelm people because they've got it in their heads they should do them.
The only thing I would add is, okay, well, I have my own bad experience. The day I recorded my 100th episode, I had, unfortunately, because of internet issues, I was off for 2 weeks. And so I set up all my stuff. I forget to set up my other camera. And I'm sitting there looking at myself going, man, I look really bad, because it was going through the laptop. The camera was still going, but I didn't realize, well, you didn't have the separate camera on. But the one thing I will say about podcasting that nobody ever talks about is they're like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. Awesome. I'm happy for you. This is awesome. And then after they get to 6, 7 episodes, and this is statistical.
Yes, it is.
They just go, oh, it's too much work. I'm done. I think you're 104. I'm not positive, but it's like you just keep going. You have to keep going, because otherwise, if you don't, then it's not a passion project. And if it's not a passion project, then yes, please, you shouldn't be doing this. But if you're passionate about the topic, if you're passionate about talking to people, which, I mean, that's the gift in itself about podcasting, is I've talked to people all over the world about things I would have never thought of talking to somebody about.
Yeah.
And that is a gift in itself. And most people don't see it that way. They look at it as like, okay, well, I'm going to go into podcasting. It's an easy way to make money. It's an easy way to get my name out there. And that's not the case. It's work.
Right. But it is work. But I will stick to my opinion that a lot of people are quitting because they're doing work that they don't necessarily have to do.
Possibly.
I mean, a lot of people, they have hangups about their editing or about their website, or they don't like the sound of their voice on the audio when they listen to it, which I would just tell them to stop listening to their own audio, but that's just me. But I mean, like, for example, for a while, I was trying to do my podcast with a free hosting platform, which I will never advise anybody to do. And it was so frustrating that I thought about quitting. But then I thought to myself, okay, who says that I have to submit my audio to have a podcast? So for about a year and a half, I just posted the video to Facebook and YouTube, which some people will tell me was not a podcast because people couldn't listen to it on Apple, but I was still enjoying the process of doing the interviews and recording the content and sharing it with people where I could share it without driving myself crazy. And then after a year and a half, I was encouraged by somebody who introduced me to the Blueberry platform that it would be much easier to upload the content and create the posts. And I've got my podcast going again. It's been off and on due to some minor health issues that I think are solved and some computer issues that I hope are solved. But, before then I was like, they say if I'm going to do a podcast, I have to post the audio, and I have to post the audio every week. Well, I decided for Max for a while, I was just going to post the video. And if I felt like posting the audio, I would. And that was okay. Another thing, you mentioned your video. Mm-hmm. One of my best watched videos that I ever recorded was the first video I recorded as the blind blogger. And if you watch the video, it looks like I'm sitting in a cave because I have retinitis pigmentosa, which means I only have light perception and I have very little peripheral vision. So if I don't look at where the light is supposed to be, I can't tell you for sure if it's on or off. So I recorded the episode without any light on, thought I'd done a great job, and posted it. And then I started reading the comments. And about a third of the comments were, Max, this is horrible. You look like you're a troll sitting in a cave somewhere in The Hobbit. You need to re-record it. But the other 2/3 of the people were like, Max, this is really a brilliant metaphor, that the blind guy is going to lead us out of the dark places by sharing his content with us. And so I left it up. It's still up. I recorded video for several months with the camera from my laptop, which for anybody that does video, that's a horrible angle. It's very distracting, but people were still watching those videos. I'm very happy, or at least my sighted friends now are happy that I have an external camera and I have an external light source. They're still after me to buy a professional microphone headset, but I keep telling them as long as this one's working, I'm not going to invest hundreds of dollars in a new microphone headset. If somebody wants to donate one. But I just think, the social media, the email list, the lead magnets, the creating courses, affiliate sales, all the things that people want to do around a podcast to make money from it. I think a lot of that does get overwhelming at some point. And I think that if a lot of people would just think, okay, I started this podcast because I enjoy crochet, or because I wanted to share my experience fighting cancer, or because I want to tell people how to be safe around the home. Just focus on that and continue to do that without worrying about all these other things. They'll keep going. That's where I come in. And the stat you were referring to is if somebody records 9 episodes, that puts them in the top 10% percentile of podcasters around the world.
Mm-hmm. They said that there's roughly, I think it was 2 million podcasts that are out there. However, there's only I think between 250 to 500,000 that are actually active, because people just give up.
Yeah. And I happen to be lucky enough. Even through the broken laptop and doing things from a tablet, I have the What's Your Excuse show. I'm helping my friend Emily Trepanier with Shredding for Gold, which is, she's a blind snowboarder that's chasing gold medal in the Paralympics and downhill snowboarding, which I think is one of the few activities I know of that makes Max sound sane. Mm-hmm. When people worry about Max traveling all over by himself and is he going to get back home or not, I'm like, I have friends that are crazier than I am. You do know this, So, helping her with her podcast and looking forward to at least one new show before the end of this month. I've got 3 or 4 in pre-production, I guess is the big kids phrase. So we're working at this network, the What's Your Excuse Network, to help other people. And one of the things that we're hoping will come out of it is we will build a community of podcasters, and that we will be able to support and encourage each other and keep each other going past 10 or 20 or 100 episodes. And if this we've started getting people who want to have their shows syndicated on the platform. We're starting to get people creating new shows. So hopefully this time next year, we'll be at the point where our traffic numbers will be good enough that we can start reaching out to sponsors with real money or investors, or even just making better affiliate sales deals for the hosts by, hey, if they're on the network, they're getting better viewership in this particular niche. So you should give us a higher percentage of the sales when we sell stuff for it. So that's, those are some of the things I'm hoping to do with the network. At this point, it seems like whenever we bring somebody in new, they bring some skills with them. Like we found out during Emily's launch that Max is horrible at virtual podcast launches. So Emily is now our chief online party planner for podcast launches going forward. And, I have a few friends who will do editing on a small basis if we need it done, starting to build more of a social media community. So it's a work in progress. And I really think that there's a lot of positive things that can come from it. And I still think it's crazy that a friend of mine had to challenge me to do it. And I told him no the first time, or we would have started this a year sooner.
No, I get that because when my husband was still alive, I wanted to do a podcast with him called Counting Down the Days because I knew he was going to be leaving me. Wow. But he did not want to. He kept, we'll do it. And we never did. And so after he passed, I have a friend who is a sound engineer, and he knew I had a radio background, and he just kind of kept pushing me, and a couple other friends kept pushing me, and it was kind of like, all right, folks, I'll do it. And then so last year I did. And I do 3 episodes a week as far as airing. And then I have an intuition podcast that I do reading on each weekend. And I'm thinking about doing another podcast separate from all these. So yeah, plus I write books, and so pretty much I got a lot going on. So
what kind of books have you written?
I write, one is a romantic suspense, and the other one is a rock star, a bass player's journal. He's kind of a cokehead. So it's kind of a wild ride of a book, and it's kind of a dark book, and a couple of guys who have read it said they couldn't believe a girl wrote it. So yeah.
Well, that's what you need to do. You need to re-release it under a guy's name.
Oh, actually, I released it under DM Needom specifically so nobody would know. And I get emails sometimes saying, "Sir, would you like your book reviewed?" Like, go to my website and you'll see I'm not a sir. And then, yes, I thought about it after I went out there and released it. I'm like, great. So my initials are DM. So I'm a direct message. Lovely. Lovely. I didn't even think about that when I released it. But yeah. So I'm direct message Needom. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But
yeah. Well, the thing is that can be a negative, or it could be something you work into a future book. It could be, that could become part of who you are as the voice in a future work. But the one thing about it is you don't have to encourage people to DM you. They will always DM you, even for stuff that you like. I mean, my favorite direct messages and emails have to do with women sending me pictures of themselves that I can't see. That's like my delete test. If you haven't figured out from my email address, which is justask@theblindblogger.net, if you can't figure out from my email address that I do not want to see naked pictures of you, then you do not want to be my friend.
I have to say, okay, I didn't know guys got naked pictures. I know girls do. I have not gotten any. Not that I want any. I don't. I get these guys going, "Hi, beautiful." My favorite, and I've talked about this a couple of times because it's the most recent one. "Hi, beautiful. I would like you to be my sugar baby. I'll pay you weekly." And all I wrote back was, "Does this actually work?" And I decided to delete them. I'm like, don't even bother responding. Just delete them. So I blocked.
There are a lot of women who still haven't got over being cared for by their daddy, who would be happy to be taken care of that way.
I know that. And I mean, my mom used to joke that she was looking for a sugar daddy as a joke. I get that. That was the thing of the 70s, but it's just like, come on. I mean, that's like somebody just the first thing out of the gate. "Hi, beautiful." Really? Really? I'm not 20. I'm not going to fall for that.
It probably does work for him occasionally.
I would think so. But, it's the same thing.
It depends on what his budget is.
But it's the same thing with, you getting unsolicited pics of nudies and women getting unsolicited dick pics. Excuse me for saying it that way. But either way, nobody wants to see this. If you really are trying, I mean, am I supposed to look at this? I remember I had a friend, he's gone now, he's passed. And he was dating a stripper. And okay, there's a reason why I'm saying this. So he comes over to, I come back to town. I came back to Texas to visit, and he came over to my mother-in-law's house to visit. And he brings this photo album, this little hand-sized photo album. He's like, well, I wanted to show you my girlfriend. I'm like, okay. His girlfriend's nude in all these pictures, by the way. So I'm looking through this, and I stop and I look at him. I said, he's like, and I finished and I handed it to him. He goes, so what do you think? She's not a natural blonde. What do you want me to say? What do you want? I don't want to see her naked. What do you want me to say? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah. It
is interesting what people will get into their heads that way,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess on that note that we've digressed this far, I guess it's time to wrap up the podcast. So is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to add?
The only thing that I think that we haven't really covered is that, I've done a lot of podcasts as a guest. I've been a host for 6 years. And so besides helping people launch podcasts, one of the things I love doing is helping people come to understand their story so they can tell their story more effectively, because that's how you get invited on a lot of podcasts, or that's how you get a lot of hosts to say yes when you reach out to them. So I love besides the podcasting stuff, I love helping people figure out their story and tell it so that, they can get on podcasts. And, that's what I've done most of the last few years to pay the bills, is teaching people how to be guests or booking them on podcasts. And the one thing I would tell people is whether you're pitching an agent or a publisher for a book, or you're pitching a podcast host or a journalist, the most important thing is that most people, there are very few people that will be exceptions to this. Most people do not buy you, your product, your service, your book, or your album. They buy your story. So, when you're that elevator pitch that scares the heck out of you, if you think about it as you're telling somebody your backstory or your origin story, you'll get better at it. But that's the only other thing. When it comes to being out here online, being a creative business owner, all comes down to being willing to tell your story openly and honestly. And if they don't like it, well, then the heck with it.
That's why, I've said this to a couple of guests. When I started this podcast, the very first episode is me. It's all me. I'm talking about my mother's suicide. And the fact of the matter is, the reason I chose that topic and the reason I did it was because if I'm going to reach out to you guys and ask you to tell me your personal story, then I have to put myself in the hot seat. And that's the way.
Very proud of you. That is a great example to set. But I still run into people who don't have that level of history to share, who are concerned that if they share it, they will potentially lose business or lose employment, or possibly not be invited to somebody's birthday party.
Oh, I get it. I at the end of December, I recorded an episode with a sex therapist. And you know what? That is my most popular episode. And I was a little candid about that episode. So yeah, I may have been a little too open. I can't top that. The closest I can go to that on my podcast is a former dominatrix who now helps stay-at-home moms run their businesses more efficiently. Okay. Well, I am going to have a dominatrix on an upcoming episode. So she doesn't help. She doesn't help stay-at-home moms now. But I have a dominatrix coming on as well. I'm sure that'll be a lovely episode, and I'm looking forward to it because she's been on my show once, not as a dominatrix though. But
y'all didn't talk about that. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like you, for me as a host, I have to be able to be honest with my guest. And if it means opening up to something I want to share, then I will. There have been a couple of topics that I'm like, I won't answer. And the same goes for my guest. If a guest doesn't want to answer, that's fine too. So that's the give and take of being, you wouldn't talk about it if you were at a coffee shop. So why talk about it on camera?
Well, me and you might. I mean, it would depend on how busy the coffee house was, I mean,
True.
And how good the coffee was. We might. I mean,
true.
We're both relatively open people, so who knows? But yeah, but it is interesting that even now, after years of more and more people being really out there with their personal stories, that we still have the vast majority of people are still scared to be authentic and let people see who they really are because they're afraid.
Yeah. Well, there's always the ramifications about saying something that, might be misconstrued, or you're going to get, cancel culture is rampant. So I get that part. I do. And, there's a lot of times when I've talked about something and I'm like, I know if you want to come at me, go ahead. There's my email address, but understand everybody's entitled to their own opinion. So that's the way I look at it. But I thank you, Max, for coming on the show. It's been an interesting.
Well, thank you, Donna. I've enjoyed our time together, and I hope that your audience enjoyed it too, and that this is what you were hoping for when we agreed to do this. And I just want to make sure I remember to tell you that I started doing podcast interviews 9 years ago because I didn't have any other way to reach out and meet people and start telling them who I was or what I was up to. So without people like you, there really wouldn't be the Blind Blogger or the What's Your Excuse. So I want to thank you for being part of my journey and part of my story.
Thank you for coming on. So Max, it's very interesting that, he has a blind blogger blog. Say that 3 times real fast, folks. And he's being an advocate. And I think that's very important to have advocates, people that are willing to help other people learn their craft. I think it's smart. I think it's imperative that we do this. And, the thing about the Carnival, there's a lot of things that we, like I was saying online or on the podcast, there's so many times that we actually look at Carnival workers and we see the way they're painted and being shady. But apparently some of that is true. Sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. You just don't realize it. So Max, I think, he has a very kind heart. And I think that, did you ever realize how much a Carnival ride actually costs? I certainly didn't. But I think that, what he has done as far as growing his podcast, his business, he's transitioned from somewhat of a Carnival thing. He still does it, but he's transitioned into being a more support system and building a network. I think it's empowering and important that he's giving a voice for the people that are disabled, because not every time does a person that is disabled have a voice, and you can be judged. I've talked about the placard that I have and how people sometimes give me dirty looks because I look perfectly healthy, but that doesn't mean that I am. And I'm not sitting here saying that I'm in ill health, but I have my own disabilities. And I think that just because you can't see somebody has a disability doesn't mean they don't. So, that's my little spiel about that. I think that, when we have vision, and I talked about this a little bit on the podcast, there was many times where I would see something and, did you see that? Well, no, my husband didn't, because he couldn't. And we take vision for granted sometimes. And as we get older, yes, our vision fades and it changes. And then we're like, we start missing it. And I think that we need to consider everything that we have, whether it's the sense of smell, taste, sense of smell, sense of taste, our hearing, our vision, whichever. It's important. I mean, my dad now can't hear because of tinnitus. And imagine losing something that is part of you. And I know people with COVID, they've lost their sense of taste. Imagine that, though. I mean, imagine the struggle and how different your life would be if you lost one of your senses. So appreciate what you have, appreciate the life you have, and be thankful for it, because not everybody is as fortunate as you are. And on that note, well, if you have a comment, question, or concern, please do not hesitate to reach out to me at Donna, DAUNA, at better2podcast.com. That's Donna at DAUNA at better2podcast.com. If you want to catch up on an episode that you've missed, you can find them at better2podcast.com. And all our social links are there, as well as our Patreon. So if you follow us, great. We also have another podcast called the Weekly Intuitive Podcast for people that are into tarot and the woo. And that you can find on Anchor, as well as, or not Anchor. Well, yes, Anchor, but Spotify and Apple. It's not necessarily as wide as the big podcast, but it's out there. So if you're into the weekly stuff, check it out. And also on TikTok and Facebook, we do have a daily card pull. So yes, there's been a lot going on, and there's still more going on, and more guests to tape and more shows to do. And I hope you're liking it, and I hope you're enjoying it. And I thank you for tuning in, as always, and enjoy your day, weekend, night, whatever, and whenever you're listening. So I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.